Coming up on New Day at Arirang, South Korea on course for a record number of COVID-19 cases in a single day. Projections it could top 8,000 for the first time. In response, officials reinforcing and adding new distancing rules. The Federal Reserve keeps US rates unchanged but doubles the pace of tapering to $30 billion a month. The Fed also sees 3 rate hikes next year. It also says inflation isn't going anywhere anytime soon. Plus, calling each other old friends, Russian President Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping, China's leader, hold a video summit. They seek mutual support regarding their tussles with the West, particularly on Ukraine and Taiwan.
Hello and welcome to this Thursday edition of New Day at Arirang. It's 8 a.m. on December 16th here in Seoul, South Korea. Thank you for joining us. I'm Woo Young.
And I'm Mark Bream. Over the next hour, we will be taking a look at the biggest news stories of the day and get some expert insights on the issues facing South Korea and the rest of the world. We begin, though, with the COVID-19 situation here in South Korea after record highs in both daily caseload and severely ill patients were reported on Wednesday. The country is expecting yet another all-time high for daily infections. Health authorities will once again revert to stricter social distancing measures.
For more on this and other COVID-related news, joining us live in studio, we have our Choi Won-jong again. Welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning, Won-jong. So give us the forecast for Thursday's figures in terms of new infections.
Yes, unfortunately, we're expecting to see another record high figure today. Thursday, expected caseload will hover around 8,000 mark, and up to 9 p.m. yesterday, a total of 6,564 new infections were reported. Now, this is a 761 more than the same period from the previous day. And more than 73% of those reported in the Greater Seoul area. However, the most concerning part is that the number of daily infections will continue to rise. According to data by the health authorities in Korea, this continuing trend will see upward of 10,000 daily cases in the coming weeks.
So, Won-jong, the South Korean government is expected to announce much stricter COVID-19 related measures today. What are you expecting to hear from them?
Well, just the month and a half into what was touted as a return to normalcy, now the government winding the clock back. They are originally planning to announce the details on Friday, but they have decided to release the information a day earlier. Now, the breakdown of what kinds of measures we can expect to see. Take a look at your screen up right now. The first one refers to limits on private gatherings. And currently in the Greater Seoul area, up to 6 people can meet and 8 can meet in other regions. But for new expected measures, only 4 people will be allowed to meet nationwide. And businesses like restaurants and coffee shops will have to close by 10 p.m. after a couple of weeks of opening without limits. Now, these measures could kick off as early as this Saturday for 2 weeks. Again, we have to wait and see what the actual plan will be in the next few hours or so.
Right, so those figures you were showing us there aren't actually firm. That's just what we think could be unveiled later.
Exactly.
But what's the state of play regarding vaccinations in South Korea then?
Right, just briefly, the Korea's vaccination campaign is picking up pace. As of Wednesday yesterday, here in Korea, more than 1 million people were administered with shots in a single day. Now, this figure is a combination of first, second, and additional shot. So far, more than 17% of the total population have been administered with the booster shots.
And well, Omicron, the variant spreading very rapidly across the world, isn't it? And it seems quite severe in Europe. How are they handling things?
Well, the top official from the European Commission said Wednesday that the Omicron variant is the most worrisome of the strain across Europe, with growing concerns over healthcare systems being overwhelmed. Now, take a listen to what she has to say.
And what worries me is that we're now also seeing Omicron on the horizon, the new variant, which is apparently even more contagious. If you look at the time of doubling of the number of new infections, that's just 2 to 3 days. That's rapid.
Now, she added that by mid-January, the Omicron variant will be the new dominant variant in Europe, stressing the need for extra social distancing measures to stop the spread. The European CDC also said Wednesday all 27 countries in Europe will see the spread of Omicron variant by early next year. Over in the UK, the country saw a record-breaking daily caseload on Wednesday. The Wednesday daily infections were more than 78,000, up almost 20,000 from the previous day. Now let's take a listen to what UK's top health official had to say.
I am afraid there will be an increasing number of Omicron patients going into the NHS, going into hospital, going into intensive cares, and the exact ratios we don't yet know, but that there will be substantial numbers, and that will begin to become apparent, in my view, fairly soon after Christmas.
Now, there were more than 10,000 cases of Omicron variant reported on Wednesday in the UK. Meanwhile, the US CDC also sent a warning over the spread of Omicron variant across the country. The concerns are also being raised regarding exponential growth in illnesses in the US as a Delta and Omicron variant and the flu season overlap.
Well, thanks very much for that one, Jong. We'll look forward to your report tomorrow.
Yeah, tomorrow.
Thank you very much, as always, Won Jung. Now, the European Medicines Agency has approved Johnson & Johnson's COVID-19 vaccine to be used as a booster shot.
It says the J&J vaccine may be given to adults at least 2 months after the initial shot was administered. The recommendation to allow a Janssen booster dose follows data which shows that the additional shot prompts an uptick in antibodies against the virus. The EMA also said that a J&J booster shot can be given after 2 doses of Pfizer or Moderna's vaccines. This makes Janssen the 3rd booster dose to receive endorsement by the EU watchdog, following Pfizer and Moderna. The US Federal Reserve has made an abrupt policy shift, saying it's going to scale back its monthly bond purchases at twice the pace it previously announced, with them likely ceasing altogether in March. With the accelerated timetable, the Fed is on the path to begin raising rates from the first half of 2022. Our Kim Yo-sun has more.
The U.S. Federal Reserve announced Wednesday that it would move more quickly to pare back its pandemic-era bond buying program, pushing forward the end date to March 2022 from June.
At today's meeting, the committee also decided to double the pace of reductions in its asset purchases. Beginning in mid-January, we will reduce the monthly pace of our net asset purchases by $20 billion for Treasury securities and $10 billion for agency mortgage-backed securities.
Powell said there was unanimous agreement among the officials at the meeting of the policy-setting Federal Open Market Committee. He added the Fed is increasingly concerned about the persistence of inflationary pressures. He said this is one of the reasons why the U.S. economy no longer needs monthly bond purchases.
Economic activity is on track to expand at a robust pace this year, reflecting progress on vaccinations and the reopening of the economy. Aggregate demand remains very strong, buoyed by fiscal and monetary policy support and the healthy financial positions of households and businesses.
The Fed, however, pointed to the rapid spread of the Omicron variant of COVID-19 as a possible risk. The policymakers also signaled a strong likelihood of interest hikes coming next year, which would be the first since the Fed slashed short-term borrowing costs to near zero in March 2020. All 18 members of the FOMC said they see the case for at least 1 rate hike next year. 10 of them projected rates to increase at a range between 0.88 and 1.12%, while 5 said rates are likely to increase at a range of 0.63 to 0.87%. Some members of the committee expected 3 rate hikes next year, followed by another 3 in 2023 and 2 more in 2024. Kim Yo-sun, Arirang News.
Now it's time for On Point, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into the biggest news stories in the spotlight right now. It was the Fed's biggest move of the year thus far. Officials at the Fed have unveiled the first steps they are taking, as we heard there, to normalize monetary policy after they held that 2-day meeting that wrapped on Wednesday US time. The Fed says it's going to move much more quickly away from its easing policies, and the stage looks set for possibly 3 rate hikes during 2022. Not only that, but there could be 3 to 4 more hikes the following year. The Fed is also slashing their asset purchases by twice as much as previously announced, putting the Fed on track to terminate that particular program in March.
So what does this mean for financial markets and investors, not only in the United States, but also here in South Korea? For the answer to that question and more, we connect to Chio Jimio, Associate Professor of Finance at Hanyang University. Thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure to be on the program. Thank you.
Well, Professor, at this point, it's quite hard for anyone to remember what a normal monetary policy looks like, as the policies are so far removed from what they were like 20 years ago. The Fed's held rates at nearly 0% for much of the past decade. And, well, with this shift away from easy money, do you foresee panic in the markets, or was the Fed's move already priced in?
Well, first of all, I mean, today Dow closed up by about 1.1%. Now 2.2%. So the market is certainly not panicking. Now, this is very obviously the FOMC's decision today is very different from what we were seeing in September when they were forecasting 0 to 1 hike for 2022. But at the same time, though, it was largely expected by the market. So the inflation figure that got released for November, year-on-year inflation increase of 6.8%. So people were expecting that the Fed would react rather hawkishly, which they did, but they didn't react too hawkishly beyond what market expected. And an element of uncertainty has largely been removed. So that's the reason pretty much why the market had a positive reaction for later today and this afternoon, I would say.
Right, so we know, almost certainly know, that the Fed is going to start hiking rates and do so relatively quickly. Now, some people out there argue that rising interest rates aren't necessarily that bad for stocks and investors. What's your opinion on that? Are higher interest rates good, bad, or neutral for people investing in stocks?
Well, there are two sides to that answer. First of all, what I would say is that stocks are determined by two things: earnings and how people perceive risk. So inflation creeping up has been one of the major risk factors and Fed not dealing with them would create actually an added element of uncertainty. So this is almost like a Fed going on the defensive and trying to take control of the inflation narrative, and removing that risk can actually be a positive thing for the investors. And another thing that I would add is that this would affect the markets very differently. So, for example, it's a bad news for the banking sector, which generally borrows short and lends long. But tech in healthcare sectors have been rising quite well. And I think that trend will likely continue further into the future, I think.
And Professor, well, here in South Korea, people just love speculating on crypto, with the biggest exchanges sometimes actually seeing more volume in a day than the benchmark Kospi. And it's been said that the Fed stimulus program long bolstered Bitcoin's allure as sort of a hedge against inflation. So a reversal might actually be bearish. So given cryptocurrencies, given that they're way more volatile than stocks, do you think any disruption will be far more acute on crypto markets?
So I was just looking at the figures, and Bitcoin and Ethereum have both been rising in response to the monetary policy. And actually, it's really down to this element of uncertainty and risk being removed. I mean, we heard from earlier on in the program regarding the Omicron variant, and there are a lot of uncertainties. And Fed moving very much in line with what investors are expecting. They are obviously hawkish, but not hawkish beyond what the investors were expecting. I don't think that's going to create a huge layer of uncertainty for the investors, be it in equities or cryptocurrencies. Now, having said that, cryptocurrency does tend to be very much more individual retail investor with a very sentiment-driven market. So that may behave slightly different to what we're seeing on the equities within the next few weeks or even months to come.
Yeah, in Powell's press conference after, he did say a couple of negative comments about cryptocurrencies that kind of pushed down Bitcoin and Ethereum for a little while, but seem to be bouncing up a touch. Yeah. Finally, though, we all know by now that the Federal Reserve's decisions ripple around the world. Just how acutely will Wednesday's announcement or any other big announcement by the Fed How does it affect South Korean stocks? And would you say that the Fed has much more sway on local markets in emerging economies like South Korea, but in South Korea's case, the Fed has more influence than anything the Bank of Korea could do?
I would say that's actually the case, especially because of Korea's export-driven economy and the fact that our exchange market is pretty much reliant on won to dollar. But again, I have to go back to this expectation management thing. So investors were expecting the Fed meeting to end hawkishly, and actually they did end hawkishly, but not more so than what they were expecting. So I don't think there will be a huge ripple around Korea, or for that matter, most of the other emerging markets in Asia. And given that, it could even be a bit of a Christmas rally going on with the layer of uncertainty removed. But it'll be an interesting few weeks ahead, so I would say.
Professor, we really appreciate your insights today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
For the second time this year, the leaders of China and Russia have held a video conference during their virtual summit on Wednesday. Presidents Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin reportedly agreed to strengthen Beijing-Moscow ties going forward. A show of their friendship, Putin will attend the opening of next year's Beijing Winter Olympics, unlike many of his Western counterparts. Jang Tae-hyun with the details.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has promised Chinese President Xi Jinping that he will attend the opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics in Beijing next year. It's an event which many Western leaders, including US President Joe Biden and UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, are boycotting due to human rights abuses in China. Putin added that a new model of cooperation has been formed based on other matters of principles like non-interference in international affairs. The two leaders spoke via video call on Wednesday. Both China and Russia have tense relations with the West at present. China is under pressure over human rights issues, while Moscow has drawn heavy criticism over the massing of Russian troops near the border of Ukraine. The video meeting came more than a week after President Biden spoke to Putin in a video conference to warn of strict sanctions on Russia in case of new military aggression against Ukraine. Reuters, citing a Kremlin official, reports that Putin won support from Xi for his push to obtain binding security guarantees for Russia from the West. What Russia wants is for the US and NATO to guarantee the military alliance will not expand further eastward. Putin also called Xi his dear friend and said that the relationship between the two sides has reached an unprecedentedly high level. Xi Jinping said that the two countries should discuss the correct meaning of democracy and human rights and serve as the backbone that defends international equity and justice. The video conference came after last week's Democracy Summit, in which 110 countries attended, except for Russia and China. Jang Tae-hyun, Arirang News.
The US and the UK have voiced support for Ukraine during a debate at the UN Human Rights Council. Wednesday's session, convened to address Ukraine, quickly drifted into criticism of Russia's military buildup along Ukraine's border. Moscow's diplomat remained tight-lipped. The British envoy said his country is monitoring the situation closely, adding Russia's activity poses a threat to international security. Ukraine's ambassador to the UN echoed those fears, saying a potential invasion would have disastrous consequences. The US Senate has given the green light to a new National Defense Authorization Act, which includes maintaining the current presence of US forces in Korea. The record $768 billion defense budget for 2022 was passed on Wednesday in a 89-10 vote, citing the need to strengthen the South Korea-US alliance and maintain the 28,500 American troops stationed on the peninsula. The bill emphasized the need to strengthen alliances in the Indo-Pacific region in a bid to compete strategically with China. The reduction-restriction clause that prevents use of the budget to reduce the number of American troops in South Korea was removed.
President Moon Jae-in is back in South Korea, having returned Wednesday from his 4-day state visit to Australia. He came back with a handful of new joint initiatives and deals on economic cooperation, most notably in defence and in key mineral supply chains. And this trip was particularly meaningful as Seoul and Canberra celebrate 6 decades of bilateral ties. To discuss the outcome of this trip and how South Korea-Australia ties will evolve in the decades to come, we connect with Song Se-ryun, Professor of Law at Kyung-hee University. Hello, Professor.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning, it's lovely to see you again. And well, let's begin with the joint initiatives that the South Korean and Australian leaders agreed on over the past week. Amid various risks and uncertainties in global trade that we're seeing right now, how are these new deals on key industries going to benefit both countries?
Right, most significant, I think, is the elevation of our relationship to a comprehensive strategic partners. And they talked about many different things, and the significant that came out of this relationship, new relationship, are several initiatives, including defense measures, also the use of resources that the Australia is replete with, like rare earth minerals, hydrogen economy, carbon neutrality technologies. And those collaborations will help a lot. And also, there were collaborations talked about the space exploration and also Southeast Asian digital initiatives to work on digital and cyber research and development. So those are things that both countries have either strength or needs. And because Korea has been pursuing kind of southern direction expansion in terms of collaboration and developments. In that case, Australia has been kind of a long overdue focus diplomatically and economically. So it is a good time to pursue those initiatives.
Yeah, the two economies certainly do complement each other. You could almost say it's like a perfect fit in many ways. But going back to the history of the relationship between South Korea and Australia over the past 6 decades or so, what do you think it means to South Korea to see this elevation from how relations were to this comprehensive strategic partnership?
Right. The diplomatic relationships between the two have been done in 1961, but we have to mention that Australia was the helper, crucial help for the Korean War efforts. They sent 17,000 soldiers to help Korea, and about 340 soldiers perished during the war. So that relationship is kind of a blood, thicker than blood kind of thing. There have been some high-level visits. President Kim Jong-un visited Australia in 1999, and Prime Minister Howard visiting in turn in Korea in 2000 and 2003. So high-level and ministerial level relationships have been ongoing. Recently, both countries have been invited to the G7 summit meetings, and I guess that laid a foundation for the elevation of the relationship. I think the most significant aspect of the two countries is that, as you mentioned, both are mid-level powers, and in current global governance environment, I think that the collaboration between and among the middle power is also a crucial element to build more robust global governance regime to address and solve many different challenges that we face: pandemics, climate change, and regional and overall security. Well, those issues cannot be relied upon on one or two superpowers, but especially the middle power collaboration and contribution would be crucial.
And Professor, well, how significant was this trip amid the changing geopolitical dynamics that we're seeing in this Indo-Pacific region? Do you think that the defense deals made by South Korea and Australia might actually aggravate China in its rivalry with the US?
Well, that's the zero-sum game aspect of the relationship with the country, Australia, that is not in good terms with another neighbor that Korea has, China. I think that Korea cannot pursue a sort of equal distance diplomacy with everybody and hope that will not upset anybody. I think it's just not going to work. Going back to the middle power issue, I think that the Korea should be more principled, and we should strive for not just placating countries, but stand up and represent values that would be more sustainable and long-lasting in this region and the world. So in that sense, Australia is a country that we share the democratic value on human rights, and also of peace. I think that because of that, Indo-Pacific area and having a collaboration with those countries would be crucial to represent the same values in maybe in UN or maybe in different round tables, so that the front that we represent together would be a significant force in building up the global governance system.
Yeah, it seems very much like the Western powers would like to bring South Korea more under its wing instead of seeing it veer further towards China. Professor Song, thank you as always for your insights, and we appreciate you coming on this morning.
My pleasure. Thank you.
This Friday, December 17th, marks the 10th anniversary of the death of former North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. This also means that it's been a decade since Kim Jong-un took the reins of absolute power.
Yes, he has poured huge sums of money into weapons development, but watchers say the North Korean economy is in worse shape now, arguably, than it ever has been. Kim Da-mi with the details.
Though initially considered inexperienced, Kim Jong-un has quickly reshaped North Korea into the Kim Jong-un regime since he came to power less than 2 weeks after his father's death from a sudden heart attack in 2011. To secure his role, the younger Kim was driven and ruthless enough to have his potential competitors killed, even his own half-brother and his uncle. By transferring the regime's power structure from the military to the Workers' Party, the 37-year-old leader has tried to make the regime into a normal socialist country, a move that distinguishes him from his predecessors and an image he's long coveted. Also long at the top of his agenda, nuclear and missile development, and there he staged 4 nuclear tests and around 60 missile tests so far. But his aggressive pursuit of weapons tests has come at a price. The North's economy is worse than ever. In less than a decade, its annual trade volume has shrunk from over $6 billion to less than $900 million in less than a decade. Earlier this year, Kim admitted that his economic policies had failed and has since avowed all efforts to keep the North Korean people full and warm, but international sanctions, natural disasters, and border closure due to the pandemic haven't made the situation any better.
If people's lives don't improve, Kim is highly likely to see his difficulties continue. To keep public sentiment in check, he needs to get the economy on track, which would likely help him improve diplomatic relations with other countries.
Making matters worse, Pyongyang could be facing its toughest moment yet. Nuclear diplomacy with Washington now at a standstill, along with inter-Korean dialogue. While the North digs in on its demand that the U.S. drop what the regime sees as a hostile policy, Washington's #1 condition for talks is still denuclearization. In apologizing for the failure of his policies, Kim Jong-un publicly shed tears, seeking a heart-to-heart relationship with his people and to be seen as a humane and communicative supreme leader. But analysts warn that North Korea's troubles will continue unless the reclusive state fundamentally changes its rigid system and ideology of going it alone. Kim Da-mi, Arirang News.
Now it's time for Global Insights, where we speak to experts from around the world on issues making headlines. 10 years ago, Kim Jong-un rose to power in North Korea after his father Kim Jong-il died of a heart attack. the third generation of his family to rule over the reclusive state established by his grandfather after the war. Kim was expected to be a milder, if not weaker, and perhaps more open leader who would take the North in a new direction. But he surprised observers with his ruthless crackdown on political figures and members of his family to establish his power over the regime. And the North remains, as ever, isolated from the world community. As Kim Jong-un begins the second decade of his rule, we look at some of the key moments so far. And for this, we're joined by Sue Kim, policy analyst at Rand Corporation and former CIA analyst. It's lovely to have you on our show again, Sue. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And well, looking back on the last 10 years of Kim Jong-un, what expectations did you have about Kim and his leadership, and in what ways has he surprised you over the past 10 years?
So I think we really didn't know what to expect. So I think in terms of speculating as to how the North Korean regime will shape out under Kim Jong-un, I think was either ranged from zero expectations to very low. And I guess it's a very pessimistic view. But one, we didn't really know too much about North Korea to begin with, and adding complexity to this is, of course, the fact that we have a very young leader with essentially no leadership experience, exposure to the international world community, exposure to Europe. We were guessing as to how he would be conducting relations with the United States and South Korea. But again, it was pretty much an open box. And we were surprised, I think, by the short amount of time Kim actually needed to get his footing solid and to do it remarkably well. And I think that the 2018 summitry with President Moon Jae-in and also President Trump also helped Kim Jong-un sort of solidify his footing in that respect.
Well, when Kim Jong-un took power in 2011, optimists hoped that he'd take North Korea in a new direction, and the then Obama administration sent an envoy, Glenn Davis, for engagement. But despite having agreed on the Leap Day deal, Kim decided to launch a satellite in clear violation of UN resolutions, and after that, it was history. Of course, the regime launched 4 nuclear tests and over 90 missile tests. Why is Kim Jong-un appearing to be more aggressive than his father and grandfather?
So looking at the timeline of, the maturity of the leadership, it's possible that Kim Jong-un has much more to prove in terms of his leadership competence, both to his domestic and internal audiences, I would say. So more pressure on him to deliver, more pressure on him, I think, to show to the rest of the world and to the North Korean population that he's competent, and also that he's one of a force that needs to be reckoned with. I also think that geopolitics also played a role. Had it not been, again, for perfect alignment of leadership in the United States and South Korea, the aggression, I think, might have been of a slightly different nature. We had, fire and fury between the United States and North Korea that sort of amplified tensions. And then on the other side, we also had a South Korean government that was more than willing, I would say, to be that bridge between Washington and Pyongyang to ink out a denuclearization agreement. And clearly, we haven't really made that much progress on that front. But the aggression, I would say, is a lot of factors, I think, that are playing into it. Of course, it's his age, the lack of experience, the motivations, the fact that it just presented an opportunity for Kim Jong-un to ramp up, the nuclear capabilities, and it was also a good way for the North Korean to extract concessions from its neighbors and also to get the attention of the international community.
And that really raises the question of whether he was serious about denuclearization. Do you think Kim Jong-un is genuine about wanting to denuclearize?
I would have to say no. And, of course, we could parse this argument in so many different ways. We could also say that he might have been willing to give up a couple portions of his nuclear weapons program. But I think bottom line, when it comes to what we were calling back then the complete and irreversible denuclearization of North Korea, that's not something that he's going to sign on to, precisely because it's tied to his survival And if Kim were to give this away, then it just essentially means that he would have to surrender not only his position, but potentially his life to not just to the United States and South Korea, but also to the North Korean people. So there were a lot of repercussions that I think Kim Jong-un was not willing to really to bear. So at best, I think there might have been an appetite, I think, to negotiate some kind of an agreement with the United States. But when it came to Kim Jong-un actually being fully committed to dismantling all of his programs, to disclosing, to allowing inspectors on site, probably not.
Well, of course, for Kim Jong-un, it's all about keeping his regime going, keeping it in power. But, well, when he rose to power, he inherited this starving population, barely surviving on the crumbling economy, governed by a corrupt regime that's very out of touch with the 21st century. And to be fair, he seems to have really tried hard to make the state more prosperous, making the best of what they have. But, well, earlier this year in April, Kim actually admitted that his economic policies have flopped. How would you rate the success of his Pyongyang policy of pursuing the economic growth and nuclear development at the same time? What do you think will be his strategy now?
So I think another way that we could be looking at Kim's policy, whether it's Pyongyang or something else, is to understand the importance of both militarization / nuclear weapons and the economic development. I think they go hand in hand. So one is essentially feeding and motivating the other. If it's not for the value that Kim Jong-un places on the nuclear weapons program, economics probably would not matter so much. And in light of, I think, the pandemic that's ongoing, it's affecting North Korea's economic sustenance, obviously, but he can't really afford to focus less on economics now. And I think we also need to make that distinction between economics as in for the general population and economics that allows Kim Jong-un to basically survive and to perpetuate his role and also to strengthen his nuclear weapons program. So I don't think we could call his policy, whether it's Pyongyang or pursuit of economic development, as successful as the North Koreans would want the rest of the world to take it as. Kim also admitted earlier this year that the food situation is not that great. He wanted people to brace themselves for another crippling effect of global economics. So he knows and he's fully aware that he's not really stepping up to his performance. I guess his strategy now, I think, again, the pandemic is affecting so many aspects of not just North Korea, but the global economics. He can try at best, I think, to continue to insert his relevance wherever he can. The upcoming South Korean elections might be a good opportunity. But again, South Korea is also dealing with COVID-19, so is the United States. So opportunities might be slim for Kim Jong-un in terms of making his stature more relevant. But I do think that as long as Kim Jong-un is able to maintain his weapons program, continue to show that he's developing and it's becoming more sophisticated, the long run, I think he will not be coming out short.
Well, there are actually few details that people generally know about Kim Jong-un, apart from what we see from North Korean propaganda. And, well, as an analyst, what details do you tend to look for and what interests you the most?
So I actually think that we learn from each other. So two North Korean analysts, we can interpret the same observation or event in entirely different ways. And I think that helps us to think sharper, obviously. But because North Korea is still largely an unknown country with so many question marks, and I think the fact that we have more information, more people coming out of North Korea is certainly helpful, but there are also contradictions. Each person's accounts are going to be different, which also just means that there's more work cut out for us. In terms of what I look for, I guess, of course, we're going to be following the weapons development, Kim's preferences for economics. leadership reshuffles. But it's always interesting to see and to think back and to take a few steps back and think about what we're not actually looking at. And I think that's easier said than done because North Korea does keep us busy in various ways. So to actually be able to pause and to say, I'm not going to look at, the current status of the missile program, and instead I'm going to focus on something that's entirely obscure. But I think it's an exercise that we should be doing, and we probably are in the back of our minds, but just more subconsciously.
Oh, well, when it comes to things that we could see during the inter-Korean and US-North Korea summits back in 2018, Kim Jong-un actually, he showed moments of, well, he seemed quite genuine and even vulnerable in certain moments. I mean, but then in addition to him actually executing his uncle, his own brother, other, purges of his regime, we've had reports of him drinking too much, eating too much cheese, and disappearing for weeks on end in early 2020. So we seem to be seeing some sort of instability here. But of course, he does seem to have sharpened up a bit this year. But how do you think he's faring or really coping with his role as leader of North Korea?
I mean, it seems like he's steadily marching forward. I know that we have had some health incidents and a couple moments where we had not seen him in public, but by and large, at least the Kim Jong-un that we're seeing in public appears to be functioning as he should be. Weapons development still ongoing. We're still seeing North Korea maintain the same posture towards South Korea and the United States. So by and large, I think the regime, I don't think we can really speak to the conditions of the North Korean people, doesn't really seem to be affected that much. And of course, it's very different, I imagine, if we were to actually go inside the country and to see how decisions are made and how, if Kim Jong-un is actually as stable as he's portrayed in public. But by and large, it seems like North Korea functions as North Korea ought to be.
Well, there have long been theories and speculations about the regime collapsing, but Kim Jong-un has continued to prove those speculations wrong. What do you think is the secret behind the regime's survival? And do you think Kim Jong-un can maintain internal stability and also rely on the Chinese for support over the next 10 years?
I think the key to regime longevity so far has been that power has been concentrated in the hands of one person, and all of the resources, not just the military, not just the nuclear weapons program, but all aspects of society, indoctrination, propaganda, is funneled into this ultimate goal of protecting the Kim family and ensuring that Kim Jong-un is able to rule, and with a tight fist, obviously. And there have been no, at least as far as we know, no challenges to Kim Jong-un's rule or questions about his authority. But I think we can also say that when we hear about the regime wanting to enforce and to motivate people to become more loyal to the regime, that does indicate it's a double-sided coin, I would say, in that on the one hand, it's North Korea, or it's Kim Jong-un rather, feeling perhaps more confident to demand that more people, or that the North Korean people remain devoted. But on the flip side, it could also mean that because he's not able to deliver, because he's not able to function as a leader that's supposed to be caring for his people, it's a way to keep the North Korean population from getting distracted and from wanting to rebel and to uprise against the Kim regime.
Well, it seems that under Kim, the focus of the North's aggression shifted from South Korea to the United States. Why do you think the North has been directing most of its attention at the US in recent years? And just to get another question in here, where do you think Kim Jong-un now stands on South Korea?
Sure. I mean, I think how he's dealing with one country is obviously going to be affecting how he deals with the other. When we look at, reeling back to the past 4 years, so 2016 to 2017, when we were sort of at fire and fury and we were seeing that tensions were rising between the two countries, South Korea swooped in and tried to build that bridge between Washington and Pyongyang. And we saw, of course, greater concentration of personal diplomacy between Pyongyang and Washington. What we're seeing now, I think, is that time-wise, Kim Jong-un is probably aware that he can't really extract much else from the South Korean government because we're, of course, at the tail end of the Moon government. With respect to the United States, of course, there are the ongoing negotiations that have been stalled, of course. But any sort of pressure that he can maintain on the United States to grab the attention, to remind us that the weapons still exist, he's still developing them, and he has every intent to actually use it against the United States. Long-term negotiations, whether or not he is able to sign a deal with President Biden now or tomorrow, I think is less relevant than whether or not Kim Jong-un is able to be recognized as a nuclear weapons state, and we're probably already there. And two, of course, weakening the United States-South Korea alliance, weakening South Korea's position vis-a-vis Pyongyang and inter-Korean relations. So they're all interconnected. And I think how he views South Korea, of course, also depends on how the South Korean leadership wants to be portrayed. And I think under this current administration, we saw Seoul wanting to play the role as a mediator and clearly was not able to fully deliver on the promises. So I think when the next presidential administration comes in, whether it's conservative or progressive, he's going to want to maintain the pressure on South Korea so that, again, the pressure is also indirectly applied to the United States. And ultimately, Kim wants the Korean Peninsula to be influenced and to be ruled by a Kim-led Korean Peninsula.
That was Soo Kim, policy analyst at Rand Corporation and former CIA analyst. Thank you so much for your insights today.
Thank you.
Seoul City is introducing innovative technologies from 25 local companies at the Consumer Electronics Show 2022. This is the third straight year that will see the capital promoting local firms in Las Vegas. It will set up an exhibition hall called Next Digital Seoul, showcasing the capital's cutting-edge tech and smart policies. On Wednesday, Seoul held a launch ceremony where the mayor reaffirmed his dedication to promoting the city's most innovative technologies around the world. Global Traveller has picked Seoul as the world's #1 city for the meetings, incentives, conferences and exhibitions, otherwise known as the MICE industry. It's the 7th year in a row that Seoul has won, and the city was recognised for investing in ways to safely hold MICE events during the pandemic by incorporating contactless remote technology. Despite the pandemic, Seoul City officials vowed to provide full support in building back to further cement Seoul's position in the sector.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. The World Meteorological Organization on Tuesday confirmed that an Arctic temperature record of more than 38 degrees Celsius was recorded in a Siberian town last year during a prolonged heat wave that caused widespread global warming concerns. According to the latest data by the UN agency, the town of Verkhoyansk saw the record temperature recorded on June 20th, 2020, and is seeing its region warming at more than double the global average. And according to a WMO spokesperson, there's only one reason for the record temperatures.
If you cast your mind back to last year, you will recall there was an exceptional prolonged Siberian heat wave. And this heat wave did play a major role in 2020 being one of the warmest 3 years on record. The heat that we saw in Siberia in 2020 would have been almost impossible without climate change.
The alarming record reported in Siberia is now an official entry in the World Weather and Climate Extreme Archive, an equivalent to the Guinness World Records for weather. A WMO committee is now also verifying other potential heat records around the world, including in Death Valley in California last year and Sicily in 2021. History was made on Wednesday as New York City Mayor-elect Eric Adams appointed a woman to serve as the commissioner of the city's police department, a first in its 176-year history. Adams, who's a former New York City police officer himself, introduced Ki-Chen Sewell at a news conference in Queens.
I'm so proud this day to tear down barriers. This amazing law enforcement professional, she carried with her throughout her career a sledgehammer, and she crushed every glass ceiling that was put in her way. And today, she has crashed and destroyed the final one we need in New York City. We have a strong, powerful new police commissioner, Chief Sewell.
Sewell is a 23-year veteran who served in Nassau County, where she is currently the chief of detectives. She will also become the city's third black police commissioner. After 18 years as a professional and scoring more than 400 goals in his career, Barcelona and Argentina striker Sergio Aguero announced his retirement from football on Wednesday at the age of 33. The sudden announcement comes as Aguero was diagnosed with a heart condition. Aguero, who's also the former son-in-law of the late Diego Maradona, was taken to hospital in October after experiencing chest pain and breathing difficulties during a match. After being given a recommendation from doctors that he should stop playing the sport, he now steps away from the game as a young legend. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Good morning. Not much to complain about in terms of unseasonably warm temperatures, but toxic dust is definitely causing trouble for many regions. In fact, an ultrafine dust advisory has been issued here in the capital, Chungcheong-namdo and Jeollabuk-do provinces. But the further south you are, the cleaner the air is, as it's been raining on Jeju and southern provinces. We will be seeing rainfall through the evening commute, so please keep an umbrella handy. Jeju will be seeing 10 to 30 millimeters of rainfall. The rest of the south will see about 5 millimeters of light rain. Morning temperatures are similar to slightly higher than the same time yesterday, but a mix of fog and dust is covering central parts of the country, so please drive with extra care. Highs in most parts will be similar to a touch lower than yesterday, so Seoul will be going up to 10 degrees Celsius this afternoon. Daegu, Busan topping out at about 11 degrees. Well, we'll have cleaner air tomorrow, along with much colder temperatures. With that, here's a look at the weather conditions around the world.
Well, that's all we have for now. New Day at Arirang will be back at 8 a.m. Korea time on Friday. We appreciate you tuning in. I'm Oh Soo-young.
Yes, thank you for joining us. I'll be back for the next newscast at 10 a.m. Korea time. Until we meet again, goodbye.